I still remember that sound clearly. The front door closed very softly, but it echoed in my head like a sentence being handed down. My son stood behind his wife, not looking me in the eye when he said, "Dad, maybe you should find another place. It's not convenient here." I nodded, pulled my old suitcase onto the front step, and walked down in silence. 35 years of raising him, and never once did I think I would sleep in my car. On the very first night after going bankrupt, I started the engine and parked behind a diner that stayed open all night. And just as I was pulling my coat tighter to block out the cold, my phone vibrated, a number I didn't recognize. That call turned my entire life upside down. If you're still here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more hearts. And if it moved you, give it a like so others can find it too. My name is George Miller. I am 63 years old. If you had asked me 3 months ago who I was, I would have said, a normal man, the owner of a mid-sized construction company in Pennsylvania, with more than 35 years in the trade. I had built homes for hundreds of families. I wasn't wealthy, but I lived honestly. I paid my taxes on time. I paid my workers fairly. I had a small house in the suburbs, a garage full of tools, and a quiet pride in the fact that I had never owed anyone a single dollar without paying it back. Then everything collapsed so fast I didn't even understand what was happening. A foundation project failed because of unstable soil, something the earlier geological reports had never warned about. The developer sued. Their lawyers were better than mine. My insurance company, after 20 years of premiums paid without missing a single day, found a technical clause to deny coverage. And just like that, I was facing a damages ruling no company my size could ever survive. I lost the business first, then the house. The bank didn't care how many years I had paid my mortgage on time. To them, I was just a number that had flipped from black to red on a spreadsheet. 3 weeks. Just 3 weeks. I went from a business owner to a man with nowhere to live. I sold what little I had left at a loss. Drills, saws, scaffolding, the tools that had once been my right arm on job sites. The money was enough to keep me afloat for a short while, but when it ran out, I did the only thing I thought I had the right to do. I went to my son, Evan Miller, 32 years old, software engineer. A nice house, a new car, a life I had once proudly believed I had helped build. I helped him through college. I co-signed his first loan. I had painted the walls of his first rental apartment with my own hands. That afternoon I carried a single suitcase. Inside were a few changes of clothes, my documents, and the thing I had the most of left, the dignity of an aging father. Evan's house sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Neatly cut lawns, white fences, the kind of place I once dreamed of buying for my own family. I stood at the door for a long moment before ringing the bell. Evan opened it. He looked surprised even though I had called ahead. "Dad, I thought you were coming this weekend." I lied. I said plans had changed. I asked if I'd come at a bad time. Before Evan could answer, Rachel appeared behind him. My daughter-in-law. She was well-dressed, her eyes sharp and cold. She had never liked me, but that look went beyond dislike. It was irritation mixed with contempt. "George," she said, using my name the way someone refers to a problem that needs handling. "Evan told me about your situation." I shifted the suitcase to my other hand. I said I only needed a few days. I promised I wouldn't be a burden. I would take care of myself. I just needed time to stop and breathe. Rachel crossed her arms. I noticed Evan immediately changed his posture, as if waiting for a signal from his wife. I had raised him, but I had never taught him how to stand in front of a family member who was falling apart. "The thing is," Rachel said, her voice soft but cold, "we're under a lot of stress. We need our space, work pressure, and issues with my family too." She talked about space, about mental health, about boundaries. I looked at Evan, waiting for him to say something. anything. He avoided my eyes. "Maybe there's a motel nearby, Dad?" he said. "Just temporarily, until you're in a better place." In that moment, something broke inside my chest. Not money, not the house, but something deeper, the belief that no matter how bad life got, I would always have somewhere to return to. I said, "I understand." Rachel smiled faintly, as if she had just resolved an awkward situation. She suggested a hotel a few miles away, almost $100 a night. I had checked before coming. 3 nights there would nearly wipe out everything I had left. I lied and said, "That sounds fine." I hugged Evan. He hugged me tighter than usual for a brief second. For a split moment, I thought he might change his mind. But then he patted my back lightly and said, "Take care of yourself, Dad." The door closed behind me. Soft, clean, final. I sat in the car in front of his house for a few minutes. I looked at the perfectly green lawn, the warm lights in the living room, a life continuing, without me in it. The hotel was full. All of them. Some conference in town. I drove around until it was fully dark. Finally, I parked behind a diner that stayed open all night, where no one noticed if an old man sat in his car too long. I leaned the seat back, counted the loose bills in my wallet, smelled fries mixed with the scent of worn leather. I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. 3 months earlier, I had an office on the 15th floor downtown. Now I was deciding whether the $7 I had left should go toward a hot coffee or not. Cold air slipped through the doorframe. I pulled my coat tighter, and right then my phone vibrated. A number I had never seen before. I almost ignored it, but when you have nothing left, you answer calls you once would have dismissed as meaningless. "George Miller," I said. The voice on the other end was low, clear, slightly formal. "My name is Thomas Reed. I'm calling on behalf of my employer." "Your employer?" I repeated. "Mr. Leonard Whitmore. He would like to meet with you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. I was silent. The name meant nothing to me. "I think you have the wrong person," I said. "I don't know anyone by that name." There was a rustle of papers. Then he recited my date of birth, the name of my former company, even the lawsuit that had just ended. "I can assure you, there's no mistake," he said. "Mr. Whitmore is in very serious condition. His time is limited." I leaned back against the seat, staring out at the empty parking lot. "What does he want with me?" "I'm not authorized to discuss that over the phone, but you will be compensated for your time, $500 for 1 hour. $500. I thought about the stiff car seat, the long night ahead, the look in my daughter-in-law's eyes. "Where?" I asked. "The Whitmore estate. I'll send the address immediately." The call ended. I stared at the dark phone screen in my hand. It all sounded like a strange dream. But then again, 3 months ago, I never believed I'd be sleeping in my car either. A text message appeared with an address in the wealthiest area of the region. I sat there for a long time, unsure whether I should be afraid or hopeful. But for the first time in weeks, I realized something. Tomorrow might not be like today. I remained motionless in the car long after the call ended. The phone screen had gone dark, faintly reflecting my face in the glass, a face I barely recognized anymore. The wrinkles were deeper than I remembered. My eyes were tired, guarded, and carried something that looked very much like an old animal driven from its den, unsure whether to turn back or move deeper into the dark. The name he mentioned was Arthur Coleman, the butler of Leonard Whitmore. The name Leonard Whitmore wasn't entirely unfamiliar. It didn't spark a clear memory, but it wasn't blank either. I vaguely recalled seeing it somewhere, on a business page, maybe in a financial analysis years ago. The kind of name people mentioned cautiously, as if referring to a force rather than a person. a legendary businessman, lived in seclusion, gravely ill. Those phrases hovered in my mind, refusing to form anything that made sense. I had dealt with enough scams in my working life to trust anything that sounded too good to be true. $500 for an hour with a complete stranger? It sounded like the opening move of a con aimed at desperate people, and I, without question, was in exactly that state. I told myself, "Calm down, George. Nobody pays you just to meet you." But then the voice from the call replayed in my memory. Not rushed, not vague, not carrying the fake enthusiasm common to scammers. Arthur Coleman spoke like a man used to giving orders and being obeyed. Every word carefully chosen, every sentence short, precise. And what chilled me the most was how much he knew. My date of birth, my company's name, the lawsuit, the timing of losing my house. Those weren't details someone could easily pull together in a few minutes. Public records existed, yes, but not that easily, and certainly not that fast. I looked around the empty parking lot. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A couple of trucks came and went from the diner. No one noticed me. No one cared who I was or what I was thinking. I gave a dry smile. If this was a scam, they wouldn't get anything from me except 1 hour of time, something I suddenly had far too much of. The phone vibrated again, a message, the address. I opened it and read the line on the screen. Chestnut Ridge. I didn't need GPS to know where that was. Anyone in this state knew it. The neighborhood where even the most modest homes started far beyond the reach of ordinary people. Where iron gates stood taller than the dreams I once had. I exhaled slowly. If this was a joke, it had been staged with remarkable care. I decided to do the only reasonable thing at that moment. Not decide anything at all. I leaned the seat back a little more and closed my eyes, forcing myself to sleep. But my body refused. My back ached. My neck was stiff. Every time I drifted off for a few minutes, another car passed by, headlights sweeping across the windshield and pulling me back into reality. Inside my head, thoughts collided like marbles in a metal box. Why me? What did I have to do with Leonard Whitmore? Or was this really a mistake? I searched my memory, digging through decades of work. I had built homes for many people. I had met many developers, some wealthy, some extremely wealthy. But the name Whitmore didn't attach itself to any face I recognized. I began to lean toward the idea of a mix-up. Maybe he wanted to meet a different George Miller. The name wasn't rare. Maybe another George Miller had done something for Whitmore. Not me. But then I remembered how Arthur had read my full name, my birth date, my company. That didn't sound like a mistake. I opened the car door and stepped outside, taking a deep breath. The night air was cold and dry, carrying the smell of asphalt and grease from the diner's kitchen. I walked a few steps, stretched my back, then returned to the car. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the cold, not because of the pain, but because of something more dangerous, hope, a fragile, uncomfortable hope that made my heart beat faster than it should have. I hated that feeling. I had learned long ago that hope, when left unchecked, makes people careless. Around 4 a.m., I gave up on sleeping. I started the engine and drove to a nearby gas station, washed my face with cold water in the restroom, and looked at myself in the mirror once more. I looked old, older than 63, but I was still me. Still George Miller, the man who had stood firm on job sites in rain and wind, who had survived hard times without asking for pity. I bought a cheap cup of coffee and drank it slowly in the car. As the sky began to lighten, I drove toward Chestnut Ridge. The farther I went, the fewer houses there were. Then fences appeared. Then gates, roads so clean they no longer felt public. The GPS announced my arrival. I slowed and stopped in front of a large black iron gate bearing an ornate raised crest. Before I could do anything, a voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Miller, please proceed." I flinched. I hadn't pressed anything. The gate opened slowly, silently. I drove in, my heart beating harder. The driveway curved and stretched ahead, lined with towering old trees whose branches formed a natural canopy overhead. Everything was meticulously maintained, but not flashy. The kind of wealth that didn't need to prove itself. The house came into view, and I had to stop the car for a few seconds just to steady my breathing. It wasn't a showy mansion you'd see in magazines. It was massive, solid, built to endure generations. I parked my old sedan beside two gleaming luxury cars. It felt like wearing muddy work boots to a formal gala. A man was waiting at the door, tall, thin, his gray hair neatly combed. His suit fit him so perfectly that I immediately understood. This was someone accustomed to moving through spaces where I didn't belong. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice low and polite, "I'm Arthur Coleman." We shook hands, a brief, firm handshake. "I understand you may have many questions," he said as he led me inside, "but Mr. Whitmore wishes to speak with you himself." I didn't reply. I followed Arthur through wide hallways, walls lined with old paintings, polished wooden floors reflecting soft light. Everything was so quiet I could hear my own footsteps, worn shoes on the floors of people who had never had to worry about money. We stopped in front of a large door. Arthur turned to look at me. There was no curiosity in his eyes, only calm assessment. "Are you ready?" he asked. I thought about the night I slept in my car, about the door at my son's house closing, about the fact that I had nothing left to lose. "I think so," I said. Arthur opened the door, and I stepped inside, having no idea that every doubt, suspicion, and defense I carried with me was about to be tested in a way I had never experienced in my life. The door closed behind me almost without a sound. The only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady but heavy in my chest, as if it already knew I was about to face something far from ordinary. The room I entered wasn't as large as I had expected, but it carried a weight that was hard to describe. High ceilings, dark wood-paneled walls, soft light from low-set antique lamps, the smell of leather, old paper, and something unmistakable from places that had existed for a very long time, the scent of power accumulated over decades. In front of me stood a large wooden desk, polished but understated. Behind it, facing the garden through a wide glass window, sat a man in a wheelchair. Arthur stopped behind me without saying a word. I stood there with my arms at my sides, feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal's office, except I was 63 years old and no longer had anyone to protect me. The man in the wheelchair slowly turned. I didn't need an introduction to know it was Leonard Whitmore. He looked thinner than I had imagined, thinner even than the old photos I vaguely remembered. His skin was pale, stretched tight over bone, as if his body were draining itself day by day. But his eyes, those eyes were different, sharp, alert, clear as blades. There was no trace of weakness in them, only the exhaustion of someone who had seen too much, known too much, and no longer had any reason to pretend. "You may sit," he said. His voice was low and steady, not trembling, a voice accustomed to being heard. I sat in the chair across from him, the leather so soft it made me feel out of place in my old shoes. I rested my hands on my knees out of habit, the posture of a man used to serious meetings, even though I had no idea what this one was about. Leonard Whitmore studied me for several long seconds, not a polite glance. It was an evaluating stare, as if he were confirming whether I was truly the man he had been looking for. "George Miller," he said. "At last, we meet." I flinched slightly, not because he knew my name, but because of the way he said it. No question, No confirmation, as if that name had lived in his mind for a long time. "Yes," I replied, my voice rough with tension. "Mr. Whitmore." The corner of his mouth lifted almost imperceptibly, a smile so thin it barely existed. "No need for formality," he said. "I didn't invite you here for polite conversation." Arthur quietly withdrew and closed the door. Only Leonard Whitmore and I remained in that room. There was no offer of water, no small talk, no questions about my drive. Everything unfolded as if those things were too trivial to waste time on. "I won't speak in circles," Leonard said. "My time is limited." He placed his thin hands on the armrests of the wheelchair. I noticed his fingers tremble slightly, so faintly that only someone watching closely would see it. "You know who I am," he continued, "but I know more about you than you think." A chill ran down my spine. "I didn't invite you here to discuss money," Leonard said, as if reading my thoughts, "if that's what you're concerned about." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure what to say. Truthfully, money was the last thing on my mind in that moment. Something else was growing in my chest, a sense that I had stepped into a room without knowing the rules of the game. Leonard tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving me. "George," he said, his voice slowing, "do you remember a rainy night, many years ago?" My heart skipped a beat. "Many people have accidents in their lives," he continued, as if making casual conversation. "But not everyone remembers the details, the smell of rain, the headlights, the feeling of the steering wheel slipping." I swallowed hard. An image flickered through my mind, quick, hazy, but enough to dry my throat. Rain, slick pavement, a curve in the road. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," I said, even though I didn't believe my own words. Leonard didn't argue. He simply looked at me, his gaze sharpening. "That night," he said, "you were driving home after a long workday, heavy rain, Route 9. I clenched my knees. Route 9. "You had driven that road hundreds of times," Leonard continued. "You thought you knew every curve, but that night, something was different." The room began to feel smaller, not because of the air, but because of memory. "There was another car," Leonard said. "Out of control, sliding into your lane." The image in my mind sharpened against my will. Blinding headlights, time slowing for a split second, rain pounding against the windshield like thousands of pebbles. "You had two choices," Leonard said calmly. "Hold your lane or turn the wheel." I couldn't answer. Leonard drew a slow breath, more labored than I had expected. "You turned the wheel," he said. "You chose risk for yourself." I lifted my head and looked at him directly for the first time since entering the room. How do you know that?" I asked quietly. Leonard didn't answer right away. He turned to look out at the garden, where carefully trimmed trees swayed gently in the breeze. "Because," he said slowly, "I was the man in the other car." The words weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, but they hit me like a punch. I felt the blood drain from my face. My ears rang for a few seconds, as if someone had shoved my head underwater. "That's impossible," I said. "That accident, the man in that car—" "I went down into the ravine," Leonard said. "The car flipped. Water poured in. I lost consciousness." He turned back toward me. His eyes were no longer sharp, but something deeper, heavier. "I was very close to death," he said. "Closer than at any other point in my life." I remembered, not in words, but in sensation, the smell of mud, the freezing water numbing my skin, the screech of twisting metal, the dead weight of a body I had to pull free in the rain. "You got out of your truck," Leonard said. "You climbed down even though the slope was slick and dark. You didn't drive away." I breathed hard. "Anyone would have done that," I said reflexively. Leonard shook his head ever so slightly. No, he said. Not everyone. He looked at me for a long moment, then continued, his voice dropping. 3 cars passed before you. 3. They saw the lights. They heard the crash. And they kept driving. The room fell silent. I lowered my head. I didn't know how to meet his eyes. That night, I had never thought of it as heroic. I did what I believed I had to do. Then I went back to my life, expecting nothing. George, Leonard said again, do you know why I wanted to meet you? I shook my head. Because, he said quietly but clearly, that night changed everything for me, and I need you to understand what it did to me. I sat there, inside a lavish estate, across from a dying man, and for the first time since I had arrived, I understood that this meeting was no mistake, and that somehow, the past I believed I had buried was about to open in ways I had never imagined. Leonard Whitmore studied me a moment longer, then nodded slightly, as if confirming something in his own thoughts. He inhaled slowly, his breathing heavier now, but when he spoke again, his voice was chillingly clear. October 23rd, he said. 11 years ago, just before 10 p.m. I closed my eyes. I didn't need to calculate. I didn't need to force myself to remember. That date had never left me, no matter how deeply I believed I had buried it. Some memories don't live in the mind. They live in the body. They wait there, quietly, for the right words to wake them. The rain started at dusk, Leonard continued. Not a drizzle, a downpour. I opened my eyes. The dark wooden ceiling above me seemed to lower. I could hear rain in my head, even though outside the windows the day was lightly sunlit. You were driving a truck, Leonard said. Alone, heading home after a long day of work. I nodded faintly. That day I had been on a job site since early morning. A rushed renovation to meet a weekend deadline. My back had ached. My mind was exhausted. I only wanted to get home, eat dinner, and sleep. The rain began just as I pulled out of the lot. I had considered taking a longer route, but in the end chose Route 9, the familiar road, shorter, though dangerous in bad weather. Route 9 always betrays people in weather like that, Leonard said, as if he had driven it 100 times himself. Sharp curves, steep grades, and a ravine running alongside it. I clearly remembered the headlights reflecting off the wet pavement. Everything shone like shattered glass. I drove slower than usual, hands tight on the wheel, forcing myself to focus. Then I saw the lights. My car lost control, Leonard said, completely. In my memory, those headlights appeared suddenly at the curve. No warning, no time to think. Just a moment so brief I wasn't sure I had truly thought at all. The BMW slid into my lane, sideways like a panicked animal. I probably hit the brakes, Leonard said quietly. But in the rain, braking only makes things worse. My hands clenched. Yes. I remembered the tires screaming against wet pavement, the steering wheel shaking, going frighteningly light. You could have stayed in your lane, Leonard said, looking straight at me. If you had, the collision would have been head-on. I likely would have taken the worst of it. But you might have lived. I swallowed. But you didn't, Leonard continued. You turned the wheel. The image returned with painful clarity. I hadn't thought about who would live or die. I only saw danger and reacted on instinct. I yanked the wheel hard to the right, too hard. My truck slid sideways and slammed into the metal guardrail. The crash tore through the rain with a violent screech. I remembered my body being thrown sideways, the seatbelt crushing my chest until I couldn't breathe. The guardrail didn't hold, Leonard said. My car went through it. I nodded. I remembered that moment perfectly. The BMW's headlights vanished from sight, swallowed by darkness. Then the sound of tearing metal, followed by a dull, heavy thud from below. The ravine was nearly 23 feet deep, Leonard said, and the water was high that night. I sat still, letting the memory lead the way. After the impact, I had sat frozen for a few seconds. My ears rang. Rain hammered down relentlessly. I checked my arms and legs, moving each finger and joint. Pain, but I was alive. Then I heard the water. Not rain. Water violently churning below. I opened the truck door, stepped out into the freezing rain, and looked down into the ravine. The BMW's headlights shone upward, blurred through the rain. The car was upside down. Water was rushing in. I was unconscious, Leonard said, completely unaware of anything. I remembered not thinking much at all. I climbed over the broken guardrail, gripping the slick slope. The ground was soft, the grass soaked, mud coating my hands. I slipped at least twice, slammed my knee against a rock, but I didn't stop. The water was very cold, Leonard said. October. I waded into the creek, the water rising to my waist almost immediately. The cold cut into my skin like knives. I remembered my breathing turning shallow and fast, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The BMW was crushed like an aluminum can. The driver's door was jammed, the windows shattered. Water poured in through every gap, carrying the smell of gasoline and mud. "I heard your voice," Leonard said. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew someone was there. I used a rock to smash the passenger side window. The glass cut into my hands, leaving gashes I had long forgotten. I climbed inside and touched a heavy, motionless body, Leonard Whitmore. At that moment, he was just a stranger, not a businessman, not a legend, just a man drowning in an overturned car. I pulled him out through the shattered window. It was harder than I had expected. His body was heavy, soaked, unresponsive. I remembered clenching my teeth and forcing every ounce of strength I had left to lift him, inch by inch. "You dragged me up to the bank," Leonard said, his voice dropping. "I was told you were nearly exhausted." I remembered pulling him onto the creek bank, turning him on his side so the water could drain from his mouth. I remembered the blood on his forehead mixing with rainwater. I remembered taking off my jacket and wrapping it around him even as I was shaking from the cold myself. "You stayed," Leonard said. "You didn't leave." I nodded. I remembered that decision clearly. I could have called for help and gone back to my truck, waited in relative warmth. But I didn't. I sat there, holding his head, talking even though I didn't know if he could hear me. I said meaningless things, that the ambulance was coming, that he would be okay, that he should hold on. "You sat with me in the rain," Leonard said, "until the emergency lights appeared." I remembered the red and blue lights reflecting off the water. I remembered the sirens echoing through the night. I remembered the relief so overwhelming I nearly collapsed when I saw the paramedics running toward us. "I was put on a stretcher," Leonard said. "What about you?" "I went with you," I said quietly, my voice rough. "Until your family arrived." Leonard looked at me for a long time when I said that. His eyes were no longer sharp. They held something close to pain. "I didn't know who you were," Leonard said. "I didn't know your name. I didn't know what you did for a living, but you saved me as if my life mattered." The room fell silent. I could hear the steady ticking of an antique clock somewhere in the estate, a reminder that time waits for no one. "The next day," Leonard continued, "you went back to your life." I nodded. I had gone back to the job site on Monday. My hands wrapped in bandages, my back aching, but I worked as if nothing had happened. I never told the story to anyone. Not out of humility, it just didn't need to be told. "And I," Leonard said slowly, "never went back to who I was." He looked out the window at the garden, quiet beneath the sunlight. "You pulled me from drowning," he said. But you also pulled me away from a man I no longer wanted to be. I sat there, my hands resting on my knees, feeling as if that rainy night had happened just yesterday. And when Leonard Whitmore turned to look at me again, I knew this story wasn't over. Leonard Whitmore continued to stare out at the garden for a long while, as if rereading a book only he knew. Morning light slanted through the glass, settling on his shoulders and revealing the frailty of a body slowly running out of strength. When he turned back, I saw clearly what I had only sensed before. His time truly was limited. After that night, Leonard said slowly, I couldn't keep living the way I had. There was no dramatic remorse in his voice, no loud self-reproach, just the dry acknowledgement of a man who had looked straight into the abyss and turned back, not out of fear, but because he finally understood. Do you know what I was doing that night? Leonard asked without waiting for an answer. Why I was driving in that storm, on that dangerous road? I shook my head. I was running, he said. Not from the accident, from my own life. Leonard lifted a hand, his thin fingers tightening around the armrest of the wheelchair, as if he needed something solid to continue. Before that night, I was at the top, he said. At least on paper, my company was growing faster than I could control. Profits, contracts, expansion, everything revolved around numbers. I listened in silence. His voice was even, but beneath it flowed something heavy. And then I started cutting corners, Leonard said. Not the obvious kind, the decisions that look reasonable in boardrooms, the deals everyone makes, the shortcuts that are faster, cheaper, more efficient. He paused and let out a long breath. Until some things slipped beyond control. An investigation, questions I couldn't answer cleanly, files that, if reopened, could cost me everything, even my freedom. My throat went dry, not from fear, but from recognizing the tone. I had heard it before in other men in the industry, men who believed they were smarter than the system, until the system began to look back. That night, Leonard continued, I had just come reminded a meeting with my lawyers. They were blunt. If I stayed, if I kept facing it, there was a very real chance I would be prosecuted. He turned to look at me, his gaze sharp but no longer arrogant. I didn't think about making things right, he said. I thought about disappearing. I didn't interrupt. I let him speak because I understood this wasn't a confession seeking forgiveness. It was a truth he had carried for years, and now someone finally needed to hear it. I was driving to the airport, Leonard said. The ticket was bought. My passport was in my pocket. I believed I could start over somewhere else with enough money that no one could touch me. He gave a faint laugh. Not a happy one. The kind of laugh a man makes when he looks back at himself and doesn't like what he sees. And then I met you. The room fell silent. That crash, Leonard said, didn't just flip my car. It overturned everything I believed about myself. He looked straight at me. This time his gaze held no judgment, only acknowledgement. I woke up in the hospital, he said. The doctors told me that if I'd been underwater a few minutes longer, I wouldn't be sitting here. I heard a nurse talk about a man who pulled me out of the car, a man who left no name, who asked for nothing. I remembered that moment. I had left the hospital when his family arrived. I didn't think staying longer mattered. During my recovery, Leonard said, I had a lot of time to think about how close I'd come to dying and about the man who saved me. He paused, his eyes briefly clouding. I realized something very simple, he said. I had lived my entire life as if other people's lives were just numbers on a balance sheet. And then, on that rainy night, my life was in the hands of someone who didn't know who I was, yet still treated it as something worth risking everything for. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, not pride, not shame, but the weight of hearing someone assign meaning to an act I had never thought about that way. When I was discharged, Leonard said, I went back, not to keep running, but to face it. He told me how he cooperated with lawyers, with investigators, how he accepted losses, money, reputation, relationships he once believed were essential, how there were nights he lay awake convinced it was too late to fix anything. But I was alive, Leonard said, and I knew who I owed that to. He started over with what remained, slowly, without spectacle. He shut down divisions he once used to boast about. He kept what was sustainable, lawful, truly valuable. Whitmore Group wasn't born from ambition, Leonard said. It was born from fear. He looked at me, making sure I understood. Fear of becoming the man I almost died while running away from, he said. In the years that followed, Leonard rebuilt step by step, not through coercion or domination, but through long-term contracts and relationships built on trust, things he had once dismissed. He learned to slow down, to listen, to stop seeing everything as a means to an end. I didn't become a good man, Leonard said plainly, but I became a different one. Whitmore Group grew that way, not explosively, but solidly, year by year, through crises and economic cycles, an empire formed not by taking, but by building. I'm not telling you this to be praised, Leonard said. I'm telling you because you need to understand what that night created. He coughed softly, a dry, deep cough that shook his entire body. Instinctively, I started to stand, but he raised a hand to stop me. When the doctors told me I had cancer, Leonard said after catching his breath, I wasn't surprised. I've borrowed too much time already. Stage 4 cancer. He said it as lightly as someone commenting on the weather, as if it were simply the final detail in a story nearing its end. 2 months, known, he said. Maybe 3 if I'm lucky. The room seemed to sag. I'm not afraid of dying, Leonard said. I've seen it too closely, but I am afraid of leaving without settling my debts. He looked at me, his gaze unbroken. And the greatest debt, he said slowly, is you. My heart beat faster, not because of money, not because of power, but because of the weight of those words. I built an entire empire, Leonard said, but without you there would be nothing. No Whitmore Group, no years of making amends, no chance to sit here today. He drew in a deep breath. And now, Leonard said, his voice lowering, I need you to listen to what I say next. I sat there in the dark wood room of a dying man, and for the first time in many months, I forgot that I had slept in my car, that my son had turned me away, that I had lost everything, because I understood that this story was moving towards something far greater than loss, and I had a very clear sense that what Leonard Whitmore was about to say next would not only change his life, it would change mine. Leonard Whitmore remained silent for a long moment after that. He didn't look at me right away. He lowered his head, as if carefully weighing every word that would follow, fully aware of their weight. Then he looked up. George, he said slowly, speaking my name with firm finality, I have revised my will. I straightened in my chair, still not understanding what he meant. For someone in Leonard Whitmore's position, revising a will was nothing unusual. A man like him had surely done it many times. I waited, listening as if to a story that had nothing to do with me. In the most recent version, Leonard said, there is only one beneficiary. He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. That person is you. I didn't react immediately, not because I understood, but because I couldn't. The words passed through my mind like sound without meaning, the way a foreign language does when you don't know it. I'm sorry, I said, my own voice sounding strange to me. Leonard didn't repeat himself. He simply nodded once. "I don't mean a symbolic amount," he said. "I'm not talking about a thank you gift or compensation. I mean everything." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the arms of my chair to steady myself, even though I was still sitting perfectly still. "No," I said reflexively. "No, Mr. Whitmore. This doesn't make sense. You have family, children, lawyers, a board. I can't—" "You will listen until I finish," Leonard cut in. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that didn't allow interruption. "Then you may object as much as you like." I closed my mouth. My heart was racing, not from greed or excitement, but from a deep, primal fear. The kind you feel when someone suddenly places something so heavy in your hands it could break your arms. "I've thought about this for a very long time," Leonard said. "Not on a whim, not out of temporary emotion. I began thinking about it years ago." He leaned forward slightly, as if to ensure every word reached me. "I have children," he said, "but I don't have a family in the way you understand it." He didn't say it bitterly. There was no resentment, just the bare truth. "My children grew up in money," Leonard continued, "and they learned very quickly how to spend money, how to ask for money, how to wait for someone else to die so they could get their share, but they never learned responsibility." I shook my head. "Even so, they're still your children. I'm just a stranger." Leonard looked at me, his gaze sharpening. "Not everyone saves a stranger," he said slowly, one word at a time. "Not everyone does what you did, the way you did it, and then goes back to their life as if nothing happened." I was about to say that anyone would have done the same, but the words caught in my throat. Because I had just heard him talk about the 3 cars that drove past. Leonard exhaled slowly. "I've spent most of my life reading people," he said. "In boardrooms, at negotiation tables, in crises. I can see very clearly when someone helps because of what they'll gain, when someone helps because they fear consequences, when someone helps because they need recognition." He gestured lightly toward me. "But you didn't," he said. "You helped because you didn't know how to do otherwise." The room fell silent again. I felt my throat burn, but I didn't let the emotions spill out. I hadn't come here to be praised. "Leonard," I said, using his name directly for the first time. "I can't accept this. I just lost everything. I'm sleeping in my car. I don't have a lawyer. I don't have an accountant. I'm not even sure where I'll be living next week. This is insane." He smiled faintly, a tired smile but completely steady. "I know," he said, "and that's exactly why I prepared." He tilted his head slightly. The door behind me opened without a sound. Arthur Coleman stepped in, carrying a thick stack of documents neatly bound. He placed it on the table in front of Leonard, then stepped aside. "The will," Leonard said. "The legal appendices, signatures, notarization, medical records confirming I was fully competent when I signed." I looked at the stack of papers as if it were something dangerous. "My lawyers have worked on this for months," Leonard continued. "No loopholes, no vague conditions, no room for dispute." "I don't agree," I said, my voice higher than usual. "You can't force me." "I'm not forcing you," Leonard said. "I'm informing you." The words stunned me. "I've already signed," he said. "The documents have been filed, the legal fees paid. When I die, everything transfers to you." I stood up abruptly. The chair behind me made a soft sound. "You don't understand," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. "My life wasn't built to carry this. I don't want your money. I don't want that responsibility. I don't want—" "Would you go back to that rainy night?" Leonard asked. The question cut through me like a blade. "If you went back to that night," Leonard said, "would you do anything differently?" I didn't answer. I already knew the answer. "That's right," Leonard said, nodding. "You wouldn't. And that's why." I sat back down slowly. Dizziness washed over me in waves. My thoughts were tangled. Just that morning, I'd been wondering if I had enough money for coffee. Now a man was talking to me about inheriting his entire life. "I don't need your gratitude," Leonard said, his voice softening slightly. "I don't need you to promise anything. I just need you to understand that this debt isn't something I'm paying to you. It's something I'm paying to myself." He coughed softly again. Arthur stepped forward instinctively, but Leonard raised a hand to stop him. "George," Leonard said, his voice low but firm, "I don't have time to wait for you to get used to this idea. But you do. When I'm gone, you'll have time to think, to decide what you'll do with everything I leave behind." I looked at him, a dying man sitting in the middle of his own estate, speaking calmly about his departure as if it were an approaching train. "I don't want this," I said quietly, this time without resistance, just truth. Leonard looked at me. His eyes were no longer sharp, but held something almost relieved. "None of us want major turning points," he said. "We only get to choose how we walk through them." I sat there, my hands trembling slightly, my mind empty. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, not because I was afraid of falling, but because I didn't know who I would become once I stepped to the other side. And in that moment, caught between the lingering despair of a man who had just lost everything and the shock of an unimaginable future, I understood that my life had just been pulled onto a new trajectory. Not by money, but by a choice I never asked for. I was still trying to steady my breathing when Leonard Whitmore spoke again, not in the voice of a victor placing the world into another man's hands, but in the voice of someone who knew exactly that what he was about to say would hurt more than any number ever could. "There's one more thing," he said, "and I think you should know it, before I go." I looked up at him. In that moment, I thought I had heard enough, that nothing could shock me more than a stranger leaving me his entire fortune. I was wrong. Leonard made a small gesture. Arthur Coleman stepped forward and placed a thinner case on the table than the stack of documents from earlier. It didn't look legal. No seals, no markings. Just a simple black item, harmless in appearance. "I've been keeping an eye on your life for some time," Leonard said. I froze. "Keeping an eye on me?" I repeated, unable to hide my caution. Leonard raised a hand slowly, as if to calm me. "Not in the way you're thinking," he said. "Not out of curiosity, not out of suspicion." He looked directly at me. "But because I needed to be sure." "Sure of what?" I asked. "That the man I'm giving everything to is still the man I met on that rainy night." I couldn't argue with that right away. I sat still, feeling something tighten in my chest. "I hired someone," Leonard continued. "A private investigator, not to follow your every step, just periodic checks to see how you live, what you do, how you treat people." I let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "So what did you see?" I asked. Leonard didn't answer immediately. He nodded to Arthur. Arthur opened the case and took out a small device, placing it on the table, a digital voice recorder. Compact, silent. I stared at it. A bad feeling spread through me. "I know you lost your company," Leonard said. "I know you sold your house. I know you tried to manage on your own until there was no other choice." I said nothing. "And I know you did something that many people in your position would never do," Leonard continued. "You went to your son." My heart skipped a beat. Leonard opened a thin folder and took out a few photographs. He slid them across the table toward me. I recognized them immediately. Evan's gate, the suitcase in my hand, the front door, photos taken from a distance, angled, sharp. My face burned. Not from shame, but from a raw, exposed feeling, like the most private moment of my life had just been laid bare under cold lights. I don't see this as an invasion, Leonard said, his voice lowering. I see it as confirmation. Confirmation of what? I asked, though I was already beginning to know. That you didn't turn your back on your family, Leonard said, even when your family turned their back on you. He looked at me for a long time. Then he placed a finger on the recorder. And I also know what they said to you. I jumped to my feet. No, I said immediately. I don't need to hear that. Leonard didn't press the button. He just looked at me. I'm not playing it to hurt you, he said. I'm playing it because you need to know the truth, not to punish them, but so you stop blaming yourself. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry and raw, like I'd swallowed sand. I've heard enough, I said quietly. I know they didn't want me there. Leonard shook his head. You know part of it, he said. Not all of it. He pressed the button. Rachel's voice filled the room, clear, undistorted, no static. You know, she said, her tone tired and irritated, I've been afraid of this day for a long time. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't not hear. He was bound to come eventually, Rachel continued. Losing his company, losing his house. People like that always think their kids are supposed to save them. Evan's voice came next, lower, hesitant. I don't think Dad is like that. Don't you? Rachel replied. Then why is he here? You think he just wanted to visit us out of nowhere? My heart felt like it was being squeezed. I'm not saying he's a bad person, Rachel went on, but he's a burden. You know we're not swimming in money. We have loans. We have our own plans. We can't support another failed person. Failed. The word landed with brutal clarity. I just thought helping for a few days, Evan said weakly. Then he'd figure something out. A few days turn into a few months, Rachel cut in. And then what do you think happens? He'll never leave. I don't want to live like that. I opened my eyes. The room in front of me blurred for a moment. You have to choose, Rachel said. Your family is me, not your father. A short silence, then Evan's voice, so quiet I almost missed it. Okay. Arthur turned off the recorder. The silence afterward was so heavy I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I stood there, my fists clenched, unable to speak. Leonard didn't look at me. He gave me space. I had lost my company. I had lost my house. But none of it hurt as much as this moment. Not because of what they said, but because of how easily they said it. No anger, no heated argument. Just a cold decision, made as casually as deciding to throw away an old piece of furniture. I'm sorry, Leonard said softly. I know that was hard to hear. I shook my head. No, I said, my voice rough. You don't need to apologize. At least, now I understand. Understand what? Leonard asked. That I didn't do anything wrong, I replied. I've spent the past few days thinking I was a burden, that I failed as a father. I looked down at my hands, hands that had built houses for other people, that had once held my son when he was small. It turns out, I continued, I was just no longer compatible with the life they wanted. Leonard nodded slightly. Exactly. He looked at me again, his eyes no longer cold or powerful, just the understanding of two men who had lived too much. I didn't let you hear this to make you hate them, Leonard said. I let you hear it so you'd stop living in illusion. I sat back down. My body was so exhausted it felt like I couldn't stand any longer. There are losses, Leonard continued, that only free us when we face them directly. I took a deep breath. The air in the room was heavy with the smell of old wood and time. I didn't cry, not then, but inside me something broke, quietly, decisively. Not my trust in my son, but the last thread tying me to the belief that if I tried a little harder, sacrificed a little more, things would turn out differently. The truth was much simpler. They had chosen, and I had finally heard that choice with my own ears. It hurt more than bankruptcy, but it was clearer than anything had ever been. Leonard Whitmore passed away on a quiet morning, just a few days after our final meeting. I received the news while sitting in my car, parked in front of a small diner along the highway. The cold coffee in my hand trembled slightly as my phone rang. Arthur Coleman spoke briefly, exactly as he always did. Leonard was gone at 7:15 a.m. No prolonged suffering, no chaos. A clean ending for a man who had always been used to controlling everything in his life. I sat there for a long time after the call ended. I didn't cry, I didn't sigh. I just watched the traffic flow past, as if I were standing outside a world that had just quietly closed a door behind me. I remembered Leonard's eyes in that dark wooden room, remembered the calm way he spoke of death as a point already marked on a map. And I understood he had prepared everything, even his own emotions. The funeral was private, just as Leonard would have wanted. No spectacle, no noise, a neat service in an old cemetery where tall, aging trees stood silently like witnesses long accustomed to seeing powerful men laid to rest. I stood toward the back, knowing no one there except Arthur. I wasn't introduced. There was no need. I was simply someone who had come to say goodbye to a man who had changed my life in ways I had never imagined. Leonard's children were there. I recognized them immediately, even though I had never met them before. Not because they looked like him, but because they carried something else. The confidence of people raised in wealth, and the fatigue of those who had waited too long for an ending they believed was inevitable. They didn't look at me. If they did, it was only in passing. No curiosity, no concern. At that moment, I was still just an older man in a worn suit, blending into the crowd. After the funeral, Arthur told me the reading of the will would take place at Leonard's law firm over the weekend. I nodded, even though I still didn't truly believe I needed to be there. Part of me hoped that everything Leonard had said that day was symbolic. A dramatic final gesture, that things would return to the familiar order of the world. Children inherit, businesses transfer, and I return to my small, quiet life. But I also knew Leonard wasn't the kind of man who said things he didn't intend to do. The law office was downtown, inside an old stone building that carried the scent of long-held money and deals signed over generations. The conference room was large, with high ceilings and a long, dark wooden table. I arrived a few minutes early and sat in a corner, hands clasped together to hide my nervousness. Then they walked in. Leonard's son entered first, tall, well-dressed, irritation barely hidden in his eyes. His daughter followed, her face cold, phone in hand like a comfort object. They sat across from me, still not looking my way. To them, I didn't exist. Not yet. The lawyer began reading the will in an even, practiced tone, familiar with moments that reshaped other people's lives. I listened without really listening, until the words began to collide with reality. Leonard left his son a fixed sum of money. Not small, but compared to the size of his estate, it was little more than a polite nod. His daughter received a similar amount. No houses, no controlling shares, no authority, just money. I sensed the shift in the room before the lawyer even continued. The confidence on their faces faded, replaced by irritation, then unease. They sat up straighter as if feeling the certainty they'd relied on slipping through their fingers. Then the lawyer looked up and stared directly at me. My name was read aloud, fully, clearly, without mistake. In that moment, the room went dead silent. I heard a chair scrape softly as Leonard's son leaned forward. His daughter lifted her eyes from her phone for the first time since entering the room. Their gazes locked onto me, Not the casual glance reserved for a stranger, but the sharp look of people who had just discovered a dangerous variable. The lawyer continued, his voice unchanged. The remainder of the estate, the majority, nearly everything, the businesses, the real estate, the investment accounts, everything Leonard had built after that rainy night, left to me. There was no sigh, no immediate protest, just a heavy void, as if the air had been pulled from the room for several seconds. I sat there, feeling as though I'd been pushed onto a stage I'd never asked to stand on. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel satisfied. Only a strange emptiness, paired with the realization that from this moment on, I was no longer invisible in that room. "Who are you?" Leonard's daughter finally asked, breaking the silence. Her voice didn't shake. It was sharp, a voice accustomed to questioning and being answered. The lawyer replied for me calmly. He read a short passage from the will where Leonard explained his reasoning. No flowery language, no drama, just the truth written in cold legal terms. A man who had saved his life and never asked for anything in return. Leonard's son let out a dry laugh. "Because of one accident," he said. "Because of one impulsive act?" I wanted to speak, to explain that I had never expected anything in return. But I stayed silent. Leonard hadn't needed me to speak for him when he was alive. He didn't need it now. The lawyer concluded the reading. Any further questions were cut off by clauses already signed, notarized, and verified. Everything had been prepared so thoroughly there was no room for argument. Leonard had anticipated this reaction and locked every door. When everyone stood, I remained seated. I felt their eyes on my back, heavy, uncomfortable. I stood last, slowly, as if my body needed time to catch up with the new reality. Arthur stepped closer. He didn't speak, only nodded. A small gesture, but enough for me to understand that from this moment on, everything would be different. I walked out of the conference room with the strange sensation that I had just become the richest stranger in the room. No one congratulated me. No one shook my hand. Only watchful looks mixed with anger and confusion. Outside, sunlight fell onto the sidewalk as usual. People walked by, talking, laughing, busy with their own lives. No one knew that upstairs, the order of an empire had just been overturned. I stood there for a moment and took a deep breath. In my mind appeared the image of that rainy night, of Leonard lying motionless by the creek, and of myself just days earlier, sleeping in my car after my son turned me away. Life has a strange way of closing its circles, and I understood that from this moment on, I was no longer carrying only my own story. I was carrying the legacy of a dying man, and the gaze of those who believed that legacy should have been theirs. My phone rang that afternoon, just as I'd left the law office and was standing by the curb, watching the rush of people heading home from work. I knew the call would come. Not because I expected it, but because Leonard had warned me. When money appears, memories and family ties always follow, faster than any apology. Evan's name appeared on the screen. I didn't answer right away. I let it ring a few beats longer, long enough to notice a strange feeling in my chest. Not anger, not joy. Just a calm emptiness, as if all emotional reactions had already been drained away. Finally, I answered. "Dad," Evan said. His voice was different from the last time we'd spoken. No hesitation, no distance. Now there was something softer, shakier. "Where are you? I heard the news." "I know," I said. I didn't ask where he'd heard it. In cities like this, news about big money always travels faster than the truth. "Are you okay?" Evan asked. The question sounded like a cautious touch, testing, afraid to go too far. "I'm okay," I replied, and it was true. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't lying when I said it. On the other end, Evan let out a long breath, as if a weight had just been lifted. I'm really sorry about what happened, he said. About the other day. I've been thinking a lot. I closed my eyes for a moment. I remembered his voice on the recording, remembered that short, easy, okay, cruel in its simplicity. I didn't mention it, not because I'd forgotten, but because I didn't need to prove that I remembered. Rachel and I, Evan continued, we talked. We realized that we were wrong. Rachel. The name was spoken carefully, like something fragile. I could picture the two of them sitting together, rearranging sentences, choosing the safest words to put into Evan's mouth. Rachel wants to talk to you, Evan said. Really talk. I stayed silent. The traffic ahead of me stopped at a red light. Faces behind windshields drifted past like scenes in a movie that had nothing to do with me. Dad, Evan said quietly, we're family. Things can always be fixed, right? Family. The word echoed in my mind with a different sound than before, no longer instinctively warm. Now it was a concept that needed to be tested, not assumed. Rachel took the phone from Evan. I heard the slight movement, then her voice came through, sweet enough that, if I hadn't known better, I might not have recognized it. Walter, she said, I'm really ashamed. I haven't been able to sleep the past few nights. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because I'd heard this voice before, in a different setting, with very different words. We were all under a lot of stress, Rachel continued. Everything happened so fast. I think I reacted the wrong way. Yeah, I said, just one word. I hope you understand, she said, her voice trembling just enough. I never meant to hurt you. You're Evan's father. You're part of this family. I looked down at my worn shoes on the cracked sidewalk. I remembered very clearly the word burden, spoken with an entirely different kind of coldness. We'd like to invite you to dinner, Rachel said, at our place, like a real family, not to talk about money, just to reconnect. Not to talk about money. The words came too quickly, like a denial prepared in advance. I let them pass. Tomorrow, Evan cut in, taking the phone back. If you're free. I thought for a few seconds, not because I needed time to check my schedule, but because I needed to be clear about my own purpose. I'll come, I said. On the other end, there was a brief silence. Then both of them exhaled at once, though they tried to hide it. Really? Evan asked, his voice noticeably lighter. Yes, I replied. Tomorrow. 7 o'clock, Rachel said quickly. I'll make a proper dinner. I hung up and stood there a little longer. The afternoon wind carried the smell of exhaust and dust. I didn't feel nervous. I wasn't anxious. There was only a strange clarity. That night, I didn't fall asleep right away. I sat in my room thinking about Leonard and his warning, that when everything happened, I needed to know who I was facing, not to seek revenge, but to stop deceiving myself one more time. The next day, I arrived a few minutes early. Evan's house looked no different than before, neat, bright, perfect to the point of being impersonal. I parked the car and stood staring at the front door for a moment, remembering the sound of it closing, soft as a sentence being passed. This time the door opened quickly. Rachel stood there, smiling wide and welcoming. She wore a simple but elegant dress, the kind I'd never seen her wear back when I was the poor father-in-law. "Walter," she said brightly, "you're here." She hugged me, long enough to seem sincere, short enough not to feel awkward. I stood still and let it happen. Evan appeared behind her, looking more relieved than I'd seen him in months. "Come in, Dad," he said. "I'm really glad you came." Inside, the house seemed rearranged, not in furniture, but in atmosphere. Everything felt cleaner, warmer, as if they were preparing to receive an important guest rather than a man once deemed inconvenient. Dinner was served. Abundant, thoughtful, Dishes I supposedly liked, according to Rachel, though I couldn't remember ever talking about those preferences. Wine was poured. Words were carefully chosen. We talked about safe things, the weather, Evan's work, a few old memories selectively recalled. No one rushed to mention money, but it sat in the room like a fourth person, silent, impossible to ignore. "So what are you planning to do next?" Evan finally asked, trying to sound curious, not calculating. "I haven't decided," I said. And that was the truth. Rachel tilted her head, smiling gently. "You don't need to rush," she said. "Family is here, whenever you need." Family. That word again. I looked at them, the two of them sitting across from me, eyes full of fresh goodwill. If I hadn't heard that recording, if I hadn't stood outside this door with an old suitcase in my hand, I might have believed it. But I didn't come here to believe. "I came tonight," I said slowly, "not to talk about money, and not to place blame." Both of them straightened in their chairs. "I just wanted to see things clearly," I continued, "and I think I've seen enough." The air in the room shifted slightly. Rachel kept her smile, but her eyes darkened just a bit. Evan opened his mouth as if to say something, then stopped. "I'm glad we could sit and eat together like this," I said calmly. "Truly, but I came here for a different reason." "What is it?" Rachel asked, her voice gentle but tight. "I wanted to see," I said, "whether, without pretending, we could actually speak honestly." Neither of them said a word. I set my glass down on the table, slowly, carefully. "And I realized," I continued, "that tonight, this isn't a family dinner." I looked straight at Evan. "It's a reaction test." I stood up. No rush, no anger. "Thank you for the meal," I said. "I think that's enough for tonight." "Dad," Evan stood up too. I raised my hand. "We'll talk again," I said, "but not tonight, and not like this." I walked to the door, leaving behind a room so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. When the door closed behind me, I no longer heard the sound of a sentence being passed. It was just the sound of a choice, this time my own. I left that old stone building with a very strange feeling, as if I had stepped out of Leonard Whitmore's will reading and walked straight into a different life without even changing clothes. The wind brushed against my worn suit jacket, carrying the smell of exhaust and the chill of a shifting season. I stood on the sidewalk for a few seconds, watching people pass by, people who had no idea about the numbers just read upstairs, and no idea that an old man who had lost everything had suddenly stopped needing to ask anyone for a place to sleep. My phone vibrated. Evan's name appeared. I knew this call would come. Leonard had seen it ahead of time, the way he saw spreadsheets, not by guessing, but by understanding human nature. I didn't answer right away. I let it ring a few beats longer, long enough to remind myself that if I picked up, I'd hear the words I once longed to hear, but this time I'd hear them with a different heart. I answered. "Dad," Evan said, his voice so soft I immediately knew he was controlling his breathing. "Where are you? I heard the news." "Yeah," I replied. A pause. I pictured him standing somewhere in that suburban house, maybe the kitchen, maybe the living room, glancing toward Rachel to see what signal she was giving. I used to know Evan. I used to understand even his silences. But today, I heard something else in his voice, the clumsy calculation of someone trying to turn around fast without derailing. "Are you okay?" Evan asked. "I'm okay," I said. And this time, it wasn't a polite answer. I really was okay, not because I was rich, but because I'd stopped begging for love where there was none. Evan exhaled. "Dad, I want to apologize about the other day. I've thought a lot." I said nothing. "Rachel has too," Evan added quickly, as if afraid I'd hang up. We behaved badly. I know that." Rachel took the phone. I heard the soft movement. "George," she said, then immediately corrected herself, as if remembering to use the most intimate name possible. "Walter, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." I closed my eyes for a second. My full name is George Walter Miller. Walter was the name Margaret, my wife, used when she wanted me to smile, to soften, to be less stern. Rachel had never called me that except when she needed to soften me to get something. "I haven't been able to sleep," Rachel said, her voice trembling just right. "I keep thinking about how we hurt you. I feel ashamed." "Yeah," I replied, still just one word. "We're family," she continued. "Sometimes things get so tense. I reacted the wrong way, but I want to fix it." Evan took the phone back. "Dad, could you come over for dinner? Tomorrow. We can talk like a family." I looked down at my shoes. Yesterday, I was the man pushed away from the doorstep. Today, they were inviting me back, speaking as if I'd left out of pride. "I'll come," I said. On the other end, I clearly heard a sigh of relief, not just from Evan, but from both of them. 7 o'clock, Dad," Evan said quickly, like closing a deal. 7, I replied, then ended the call. I stood on the sidewalk a little longer. The cold no longer crept into my chest the way it had the night I slept in my car. But something else was rising in me. A cold, clear awareness. Leonard had given me money, yes, but he had also given me something else, an undeniable truth about the people I called family. That night, I didn't go to sleep early. I sat alone in the motel room, watching the yellow light reflect on the window like a fake moon. I opened the envelope Leonard had left me before he died, the one Arthur had handed to me as if it weighed more than gold. Inside were a few pages, some copies, some numbers, things that a year ago I would have called an invasion. But now I understood. Leonard hadn't given them to me so I could seek revenge. He'd given them so I wouldn't be deceived again. There was also a short recording, different from the one I'd heard at the estate. This one was from afterward, when Evan and Rachel thought I'd already left, when the door had closed, when they relaxed. I didn't press play. I'd heard enough to know what I needed to do. The next morning, I bought a bottle of ordinary wine. Not expensive, not appropriate, not something meant to impress. I chose a neat jacket and a clean shirt. I didn't want to look like a winner showing off trophies, and I didn't want to look like a desperate old man asking for pity. I wanted to look like myself, a man who had been through enough to stop playing roles. At 10 minutes to 7, I parked in front of Evan's house. The house felt completely different this time. Not because its structure had changed, but because it had been staged to welcome someone important. The porch lights were brighter than usual. The doormat was so clean it felt like no one had ever stepped on it. The glass door shone. Even the hedge along the front yard had been trimmed neatly as if a crew had been hired that day. I stood at the door for a moment, remembering the soft sound of it closing the week before. Back then, it rang like a sentence being passed. Today, I heard it in my head like a period, a punctuation mark I had already moved beyond. I rang the bell. The door opened immediately. Rachel stood there with a wide smile and a carefully practiced hug. She wore a neutral-colored dress, just elegant enough, just family enough. Her hair softly curled, her lipstick subtle. Everything was perfect to the point that I could see the preparation. "Walter?" she exclaimed, her voice bright as if we'd always been close. "You're here." She hugged me. I let it happen, didn't return it too much, didn't pull away. Evan appeared behind her, his face lighting up like a child about to receive a gift. "Come in, Dad," Evan said, and I noticed how naturally he said Dad this time. Natural. Because today, Dad had returned to a position he found useful. I stepped inside. The atmosphere had been adjusted. I didn't know what kind of scented oil they'd used, but a soft fragrance drifted through the living room like an invisible apology. Candles were on the table, flowers too. An old photo album sat in the corner like a prop waiting for its cue. "Sit down, Dad." Evan pulled out a chair. "What would you like to drink? I've got scotch." I almost laughed. I'd never told him I liked scotch, but he said it as if he'd always known me, the kind of knowing people use to score points in important meetings. "Water is fine," I said. Rachel quickly went to get it, moving like a model wife in a commercial. Evan stood close, his hand touching the back of my chair, as if afraid I might disappear. Dinner was served at exactly 7:15 p.m. Prime rib, mashed potatoes, salad, warm bread, wine. Everything far more polished than the dinners I used to have there, back when I paid for things, fixed things, signed things, and dinner was just last-minute pizza. They apologized. A perfect apology. Evan started, his voice breaking at just the right moment. "Dad, I was wrong. I didn't stand by you when you needed me most." Rachel followed, tears appearing on schedule. "I was scared. I was overwhelmed. I couldn't think beyond my own pressure." They mentioned family at least 4 times in 10 minutes. They spoke of bond as if it were an elastic string, pulled when needed, released when convenient. I ate slowly, nodded just enough, listened, didn't argue, didn't expose anything yet. I stayed silent and observed. I watched how Rachel placed her hand on Evan's at the right moments, reminding him to stick to the script. I watched how Evan looked at me, then at Rachel, then back at me, like someone trying to stand on 2 boats at once. I watched how they spoke about the future, about starting over, about being closer, and I also watched what they didn't say. They didn't ask where I'd slept in my car. They didn't ask if I'd been cold. They didn't ask what I'd eaten those days. They didn't ask how it felt to walk away from their house with an old suitcase. Those questions weren't in the script. Near the end of the meal, Evan asked, very carefully, "So, what are you planning to do next?" The question sounded casual, but I heard the anticipation beneath it. I set my fork down, took a sip of water, and looked straight at Evan. "I haven't decided," I said. Rachel smiled gently. "You don't need to rush," she said. "We're here. Family, after all." I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "Family." Then I stood up. Both of them froze, as if I'd stepped off script. "I brought something with me," I said calmly. I took 2 envelopes from my jacket pocket. I placed one in front of Evan and one in front of Rachel. "What is that, Dad?" Evan asked, his eyes lighting up. "A gift," I replied. "A small gift." Rachel touched her envelope as if it were something warm. She looked at me, her eyes glistening. "Walter, you didn't have to—" "Go ahead and open it," I said. Evan opened his first. Inside was a cashier's check. The amount was $25,000. Evan's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Dad, are you really giving this to me?" Rachel opened hers. Also $25,000. She started crying immediately, but the kind of soft crying you see from someone used to being on camera. "Oh my God, I don't even know what to say," Rachel said, her hands trembling. I'm really moved." I looked at them. I let them feel moved for a few seconds. Then I placed a thin folder on the table next to the 2 envelopes. "Now," I said, "I want to talk for real." The air changed instantly. Evan swallowed hard. Rachel stopped crying as if someone had flipped a switch, though she tried to keep her face gentle. "Dad, what do you mean?" Evan asked. I opened the folder, unhurried, not angry. I read the way I'd read a construction site report. Direct, clear, without emotion. "Evan," I said, "you're carrying $43,000 in credit card debt." Evan froze. Dad, how did you hear? I looked at Rachel. And Rachel, I said, your spending has gone up by about $30,000 a year, while your income has stayed almost the same. Rachel stiffened. Walter, I'm not finished, I cut in, still calm. You're 3 months behind on your mortgage payments. Evan jumped to his feet. No, Dad, what are you talking about? Who told you this? I also know, I said, why you called me today. Rachel gripped the edge of the table. Walter, you're misunderstanding. I pulled out the small recorder and set it on the table. I didn't press play. I just set it there. Do you remember this part? I asked. Evan went pale. Rachel stepped back slightly, as if the device were a snake. Dad, did you record us? Evan stammered. I didn't, I said, but I listened. Rachel tried to recover her soft tone. Walter, I can explain. I was panicking that day. I said stupid things. I didn't mean... I raised my hand. Rachel, I said, you don't need to explain anymore. You told the truth when you thought no one was listening. Evan turned to Rachel as if to ask, Is that true? Then his eyes came back to me. Dad, Evan said, his voice breaking. I really didn't want to hurt you. I was stuck in the middle. You weren't stuck, I said. You chose. Evan collapsed back into his chair, his hands covering his face. Rachel's breathing quickened, her eyes darting as if looking for an escape. What are you doing? She said. You brought money and then... I brought the money, I said, so you could see something. I slid the 2 checks back toward them. Take them, I said. I'm not taking them back. I didn't come to take anything back. Evan looked up, his eyes red. Then what do you want? I looked straight at him. No anger left, just clean truth. You don't love your father, I said slowly. You love the sense of safety when your father has money. The words landed on the table like a heavy object. Rachel started crying again, this time a little more real, out of panic. Evan shook his head over and over. No, Dad, that's not true, Evan said. Then when did you call me before today? I asked. When did you ask what I was eating, where I was sleeping, whether I was cold? Evan opened his mouth, then went silent. Rachel spoke softly. Walter, you're being too cold. I nodded. Maybe, I said, but cold is better than blind. I stood up and adjusted my jacket. Where are you going, Dad? Evan jumped up, alarmed. I'm going home, I said. Rachel rushed toward me, her voice frantic. Walter, we can start over. Family forgives. I looked at her, then at Evan. Family can forgive, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to put myself back in the same place where you were already ready to push me out again. Evan choked. Dad, please, give me another chance. I looked at my son for a long time. I remembered him as a little boy, wearing a toy hard hat, following me onto job sites. I remembered him calling me a dream builder. I remembered the nights I worked overtime to pay his tuition so he wouldn't have to carry debt too early in life. I didn't hate him. That was the painful part. I'm giving you a chance, I said. A chance to grow up, not a chance to keep leaning on me. I walked to the door. This time, I didn't hear the door close like a sentence being passed. I was the one who closed it. Outside, the air was cool. I took a long breath, as if my lungs were free for the first time. The weeks that followed were strange. I was busy, but no longer panicked. Arthur and the lawyers handled the transfers. I learned how to sit in meetings I'd previously only seen on television. I hired capable people to manage what I didn't understand. I kept what Leonard had built, not out of ambition, but out of respect for the work he'd rebuilt from ruins. But the first thing I did for myself was buy a small house by a lake, Not a mansion, no iron gates, no staff. Just a two-bedroom wooden house with a small porch, a warm enough kitchen, and calm water out front. I paid cash. For the first time in my life, I signed papers without worrying about interest rates, without worrying about banks, without worrying that one fall would take the roof off my head. I walked into that house alone, set the keys on the table, and stood still. No one said, "This isn't convenient." No one needed personal space. No one judged whether I was a burden. There was only the sound of wind, the soft movement of water, and a kind silence. I hung a photo of Margaret in the living room. She smiled gently, her eyes still asking the same old question. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay now, Maggie," I said softly. This time, really. I began helping others, but with boundaries. I donated to a nearby shelter for homeless veterans. I went there a few days a week, not as a rich man, but as someone who had slept in his car, counted every dollar, and understood what it felt like to be forgotten by the world. I helped them write job applications, fix old cars, repair broken wooden doors. I listened to their stories without judgment. I gave them the respect I had once needed most, but I didn't let anyone pull me back into blind sacrifice. Evan called. Twice, 3 times. I answered once just to say I was well. Evan said he was sorry. I believe he was sorry, in the way he was capable of being sorry. But I didn't rush in to save him from the consequences of his choices anymore. I didn't cut my son out of my life. I just stopped offering my entire life as a bridge for him to cross without ever looking back. Occasionally, Rachel sent short messages, things like, "Happy holidays," "Hope you're well." I replied politely, at the right distance. Not cold, not close. Enough to keep a door slightly open, but not enough for them to think it led back to the safe. Some afternoons I sit on the porch, watching the sunset fall across the lake, thinking about Leonard Whitmore. He had once run away, then turned back. He had once lived for money, then, at the end, used money to say something he'd wanted to say for a long time. That character is worth more than blood when blood has forgotten its meaning. And I came to understand something else as well. Real wealth isn't the number in a bank account. Real wealth is not having to ask for shelter in anyone's heart. It's the freedom to choose where to live, who to be with, who to help, and when to walk away from places that no longer respect you. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end, I want to say this sincerely. Thank you so much. I don't take your listening for granted. At this age, I understand something simple. Everyone's time is the most valuable thing they have, and you spent yours on my story. I'm also curious. What city are you listening from? And what do you think? Was I right, or was I too cold with my son? If it were you, would you forgive right away, or would you set boundaries too? Leave me a comment and let me know. I read every single one, and if you want to hear more stories about how an old man learns to stand straight again, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can meet again in the stories to come. I appreciate you, truly.